The historic length called the Age of Enlightenment is the length while the philosophy of enlightenment was born and began to be adopted within the 18th century. It defines the period of highbrow improvement that developed in the 17th and 18th centuries in Western society, aiming to free up rational notion from vintage, traditional and unchangeable assumptions, prejudices and ideologies, and to increase repetition in the direction of new understanding. In the Dark Age period, Europe banned science and thinking as it was thought to be against religion. So, there was no modern and cognitive education that people could benefit from. To them, nothing that is familiar appears unaccountable or difficult to comprehend. They complain not of any want of evidence in their senses, and are out of all danger of becoming skeptics. The main intellectual developments that led to the Enlightenment were the Renaissance and Reformation movements, and as a result of these, a new educational period was entered with the efforts of those who were influential in their period.
The Age of Enlightenment is defined by a period of time during the 17th and the 18th century, which a radical change of direction was seen in the fields of philosophy and sciences. Although there were many factors which caused the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, some of the more apparent ones seem to be the changes made regarding the methods of discourse and argumentation. In 1637, the French philosopher René Descartes published his work, Discourse on the Method, which led to pioneer the rationalist movement. The rationalists believed that the human mind and rationality was competent enough to figure the laws of nature. Although this movement was soon to be overtaken by the experimental and observational approach of the empiricists, it sufficiently managed to grab the academics' attention from theology and drew the interest towards the more secular concerns of philosophy and sciences. So much so that around the end of the 18th century, in 1784, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant published this paper titled An Answer to the Question, What is Enlightenment?, which gave a definition to the circumstances that the people were living by at the time. Soon after, in 1792, Kant published his work, The Conflict of the Faculties, in an attempt to promote the works of the faculties of philosophy over the faculties of theology. All these ideas being proposed during the Age of Enlightenment preceded and formed the basis for the 19th century beginnings of the second phase of the scientific revolution.
The scientific revolution had not yet significantly impacted the educational system before the Enlightenment. Religion and superstition were replaced by logic and scientific truths due to the scientific process. Science and technology advanced as a result of scientific revolution. People do not just accept the majority's thoughts and points of view. They may still use critical thinking and reasoning to distinguish between what is good and wrong. The 18th century print culture explosion was both the outcome and the cause of rising literacy. Because of the growing literacy rate and desire for books, the number of books written during the Enlightenment period expanded considerably. Libraries and museums, for example, have transformed. The Enlightenment gave birth to the public library system. The state-supported public libraries were open to the public and free for use. Before the Enlightenment, libraries in Europe were owned mainly by academies, aristocracy, and private individuals. With the establishment of public libraries, it became a location where the general people could research topics of interest and self-educate.
Although there were schools at 17th and 18th centuries for women's education and for poor people at that time, women were taught best to be at home while education was considered appropriate only for noble or more rich people and families. After the improvements and change of ideas at the Age of Enlightenment in education, some philosophers such as Wollstonecraft, Locke, Berkeley and Hume claimed that education should be accessible by everyone because what constitutes as our knowledge and understanding depends on the experience and sensation from world, and this capacity is similar for all people. For example, David Hume stated at 1748 that in his inquiry concerning human understanding, all of knowledge of people comes from our custom and habits, which were made by inferences, by experiencing and sensing the world around us. These kinds of improvements on humanity's thought and perspective pushed people to stand against authorities and made thought that education should be available for everyone from early childhood equally. However, women's situations at 17th and 18th century were more complicated, and women's opportunities was undermined by authorities. In addition to that, Mary Wollstonecraft stated at 1791 in her A Vindication of the Rights of Women with structures on political and moral subjects, claimed that the inequalities conducted by all thought and perspective was not natural or innate differences, but discard of women's rights, poor education, and weakened expectations set for women. As a result, it can be said that after the improvements on human education system and perspective, Age of Enlightenment paved the way for more equal education for every aspect of society after that time.
Thus, after the Enlightenment, people had a belief in the cost of studying, of the complete function and scope of education, and of its essential function in society. Professor Butts remarks that it was an astonishing achievement that barbarian Europe could ever have been Latinized at all, even by the whip, and pays just tribute to the human methods of Comenius. He concludes with the distinction between the old oligarchic education designed to man church and state, and the new mass education which includes whole peoples and which he rightly insists must combine humanism and science. Its DNA consists of imported thinking and unfastened debate. Over generations, the venture of training evolved around those standards.